So after Israel, I went to Paris to spend 2 months there. And I just want to set the stage here with a picture. This is a large generalist French bookstore, multi-story bookstore, like a very big Barnes and Noble. And so just to give you a sense of how much further along French culture is in its loss of any Judeo-Christian ethos. This, if you know any French, you can see that it says épanouissement personnel, which means personal flowering, personal development. We might say self-help, or spiritual but not religious, or moralistic therapeutic deism, if you know that phrase. So that is the spiritual but not religious section in this multi-story French bookstore. And apart from a shelf of Bibles, that is the Christianity section. Christianisme. That's the culture. So I first went to France to study abroad in 1982 in college, and the churches were just empty. I mean, I would go to Mass on Sunday, and it would be me and 5 Vietnamese families and 7 old ladies in a building that seated 700. And when Mark and I lived in Paris during a year, we weren't there a whole year, but we lived there during a year between jobs in 2005, it was very clear that something really big was happening among Christians there, that things were changing. And so the sabbatical project that I had, the question I went with was, given the almost totally de-Christianized nature of French culture, how to explain the vibrant and packed liturgies and prayer meetings and formation events that I was starting to see. So I visited a lot of liturgies, I visited a lot of events, and I interviewed clergy. I don't have pictures of the laity that I interviewed, but here are 6 priests that I got to interact with or interview, and all of them are in parishes in one way or another because they feel it's important that priests have a parish ministry, but there also are 3 doctorates in the bunch. They send a lot of people for doctorates in that diocese, and 2 of them teach at the graduate level, and all of them are on the ground actively forming ordinary lay Christians day in, day out. And in my very first interview, one of them said something that I was to hear over and over again, which was, "Do you know the work of Cardinal Lustiger?" So there's Cardinal Lustiger. He was the Archbishop of Paris beginning in 1981. And he forced that diocese out of their denial about why they were in decline. Like most churches in decline, they thought that their problem was things like, we aren't attracting enough young people. We don't have enough money. We need more people in the pews. And we hear, all of us in the West, we hear these completely internally focused, institutionally focused questions all the time. And what Cardinal Lustiger was able to do was force people in his diocese to ask a different question. And he, in fact, acquired the nickname Cardinal Bulldozer. And the question he got them to ask was one not about their symptoms, but about what's the disease that's causing the problem. And in 1982, he was already able to see that the problem that they had throughout France was really all about the mediocrity and the ineffectiveness of the Christian life among people who thought of themselves as Catholic. The institution had not been shaped to create Christians, to equip convinced disciples of Jesus, but to kind of help out in a culture that had a general Judeo-Christian ethos. So once church-going dropped out of the general cultural ethos as something that most people did, everything fell apart because they had let go of the Christian baton that they were supposed to be passing down long ago. And he uses, in the very first year of his episcopate, he uses this striking metaphor that I think I mentioned in a sermon a few weeks ago of a family that inherits a beautiful mansion in the country, which, happens in France. And he talks about this family asking all sorts of questions like, should we put a different kind of curtain up? Should we make a deck out front? Would more people come visit us if we went out to the countryside? Well, what if we put a sign up saying we have a beautiful mansion? Our house is wonderful. And Cardinal Lustiger said, what we need to understand is la maison n'existe plus. The house doesn't exist anymore. The house is not there. Christianity has to be rebuilt before we start talking about what we're going to hang on the wall and what signs we're going to put up. So the first thing that he did was to start with a complete reform of clergy education. Because if your clergy are not converted Christians, forget about it. So he began, we see this very much in our own world, in the Episcopal world. We see people showing up at seminary who have very little Christian experience, who don't know how to pray, who've never read the Bible, who aren't really familiar with the prayer book. So he said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a year to make Christians out of the people who want to go to seminary. And at the end of that year, you will have read the Bible, you will have prayed together in these little houses that they have, and you will know what it is to live the Christian life. And after that, then maybe you'll go to seminary, maybe you won't. So 500 or 600 people have gone through that year of formation. A number of them have gone on to seminary, but not all. So the second thing he did after introducing that year for conversion was to break down the concept of an academic campus that you go away to and have his seminarians live in dispersed houses. And that's a little map of Paris, and you can see where all the houses are. In parishes from the beginning, subject to, therefore, constant interrogation of what you were learning, the constant need to apply what you were learning. All of this aimed, and also, frankly, nowhere to hide. When you're living with 8 people in a house, you can't just kind of slide through seminary and be a person with a lot of issues. So all of this was aimed at making the clergy really deeply rooted in classical Christianity. So rooted in classic Christianity, adept at explaining and presenting it to people, and realistic about the importance of training people to live as a Christian minority now, rather than being nostalgic for the days when just general social mores happened to bring a lot more people in the door, but a lot more apathetic people. So what they have now is a clearly focused, classically equipped, very prayerful, academically rigorous, very open to the world, and consistent group of clergy who, they're different people. They have different gifts. Some of them are smarter than others, but they are able to do, across all the parishes, this kind of full court press of teaching and rebuilding Christian faith itself, rather than spending their energy on trying to attract more customers to keep shoring up a mediocre institution. So as the clergy were being reformed, which started in the 80s, lay adults were beginning to get the message and starting to prioritize making their kids into disciples, which you can only do by living as a disciple at home. And we'll see some results of that commitment later. And then the diocese, as lay people got on board, began to create spaces and offerings for dialogue and formation, eventually culminating in the place that I have several different pictures in a collage here, the Collège des Bernardins, which is in the Latin Quarter. And it's a state-of-the-art gathering and educational facility installed in a gorgeous 11th century monastery building. So you walk in and you just gasp at the beauty of the place. And it is a number of things, again, very much reflecting Lustiger's vision. It's a school that's open to everybody. It is an interreligious dialogue center. It's a lay formation center, both for on-site things that you can send someone to learn how to lead a Bible study, and they offer multiple different formation opportunities in parishes. It is a generic cultural center with lots of concerts, lots of art shows. You see a picture of a concert there under one of the 11th century windows. And it eventually became the academic portion of the seminary where you would travel to for the coursework of your formation. So you see that it very consciously has this constant cross-pollination of populations. Endless opportunities for evangelism. So just an incredible place with lots and lots of stuff going on that people eagerly take advantage of and soak up. So I mentioned there was formation from the diocese available in the parishes, and I want to talk a bit about that now. In addition to those things run out of Bernardin but hosted locally, most of those tend to be from 2 to 4 year commitments. There are also really intense and life-transforming things happening in several local parishes. You see there 2 of what I think are kind of the flagship parishes on the left, Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is the kind of the chaplaincy to the Sorbonne and all of the many, many educational institutions on the left bank. And then on the right here, La Trinité, which is on the right bank, a very prosperous area. And you can maybe see the signs they have hanging up in English, come and see, in French, venez, voyez. So always trying to draw people in. The first thing I did, in fact, was go to a mass at La Trinité. So this is a picture. This is not my picture because I was seated in the front row and made a fuss over, but this is a picture from their website of Trinité's Sunday night Mass. It is a standard, absolutely normal, full Mass with some modern music, some Latin chants, some incense, but completely staffed by their under 40 folks. Just a team of, I don't know, maybe 90 under 40 folks staffing this and their younger clergy. And their usual attendance at that every Sunday night is 800 to 900. And yeah, it's kind of impressive. And this is in a culture where, depending on how pollsters ask the question, 4 to 7% of people say that they're practicing Christians. So 800 to 900 at that Mass, and then about 300 of those come back a weekday evening for this program that you see the flyer for up there, JET, and it says Devenir disciple du Christ, becoming a disciple of Christ, 2018 to 2019. So about 300 of them come back to that. And if you come twice, they take you aside and say, you got to tell us, are you in or you're out? You're either doing this, you're going to become a disciple, or you're out. They have lots of other programs, Alpha for new Christians, lots of different formation things for couples, for youth, for children and adults. And when you finish JET, which is 2 years, they take you aside again and say, okay, we know that was fun and you'd like to keep coming, and it's really fun to keep coming to a Bible study, but you've learned how to be a Christian now. We need to find you a ministry. Here are 3 or 4 things that we think would be really good for you. What would you like to do? So they move naturally out. in nearly every parish, there's a very clear path of choosing to follow Christ, learning how to live as a Christian, and then putting that to work. Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which was the other thing that I had the picture of, they and 15 other parishes are running this program called EVEN, which stands for École du Verbe éternel et nouveau, the School of the Eternal and New Word. That's a picture of Saint-Germain-des-Prés where they're discussing the theme of the week. That can be up to a 4-year program for folks going up to about age 30. Saint-Germain-des-Prés also gets about 300 people a week at that, and other parishes get similar sizes. These 2 years of formation in groups, including weekend trips, we'll talk a bit about that in a minute, a year reading a gospel deeply together for the entire year, and then a year being trained and getting experience and mentoring in a specific lay ministry. And again, this is not just drop in. I mean, if you have to commit if you want to do this, and there's lots more going on. There are brochures and stuff back there. So what are some of the emphases now that there's this core of invested people who are equipped as Christians and ready to reach out? What are some of the emphases? So one thing I would say is in these formal mentoring and training programs and in parishes, there's an incredibly strong emphasis on prayer, and in particular group Eucharistic adoration is very, very big. Many, many events will start with 30 minutes of Eucharistic adoration, which ensures that you don't just have an intellectual education, you're not just having an interesting conversation about religious ideas, you're encountering God and you're being shaped as a person. You're spending time in prayer, you're spending time in study, you're being encouraged to move on into mission, and of course all of this happens in a context of fellowship. Another emphasis would be pilgrimage, going to holy places for all ages, both these groups and in parishes. I think every parish that I went to had 2 or 3 posters up saying, women's pilgrimage will be September 17th, put it on your calendar now. Men's weekend is October 8th, get it on your calendar now. So bringing people to these holy places where the love of God and the action of God is intensely localized, where God has done great things, or where many people have been praying for centuries. And that's become so important because the surrounding culture is so disconnected from the basic forms of Christian thought. You know, there is no Judeo-Christian culture to help you learn that, say, forgiveness is a good thing. You know, any of these sort of basic ideas that used to be diffused through Western culture are not there anymore. And so people, they feel, need to be gotten into environments where Christianity itself can seem plausible. I heard one bishop in a speaking engagement frame his most important task. He said, the most important thing that I do is get people into places where they can develop the interior liberty to even be able to choose God in a culture like this one. So of course, not everybody can go on a pilgrimage. So again, there's this emphasis on creating places with extraordinary beauty, creating environments that are deliberately unlike the surrounding world, that highlight the fact that Christianity is different. It's not what you're getting in the metro. It's not what you're getting on Facebook. It's not what you're getting on TV. It's a thing. And this sort of flies in the face of a previous generation's recommendations, and we heard this in America just as they heard it in France, and I think it's still quite influential here, that the best way to reach people is to lower the bar and lower the bar and lower the bar and make the church as similar to the world as possible. So that when you walk in the church, you should feel completely comfortable because it's just like the outside world. Exact opposite of that. So these gorgeous, the French are really good at making beautiful stuff. So these gorgeous environments in these gorgeous buildings, and also getting people to religious communities. This here, there's lots of newer monastic communities that have arisen since the 60s or 70s, and they are often kind of loose with vowed members, but also families and people who are connected in various ways. And so this is the Sisters of Bethlehem. It's a contemplative order that's right in the middle of a big plaza that people come from all over to. And this community and other communities are serving as a kind of way station of transformation where people can see what Christianity is at full strength and, develop the liberty to think and live as a Christian and find support for that in a world that thinks and lives completely differently. Another example, the Fraternities of Jerusalem. They're right in the middle of the touristy Marais district, and they get maybe 40 to 60 people at their daily offices, which are all chanted unbelievably beautiful. You're kneeling on these odd little chairs. It's different, it's weird, it's gorgeous. It's not what your society is trying to socialize you to want and value. It's an intense, deliberate place that you can come to be free enough to want and value something more. In the same way, I really don't have a good picture for this, but there are lots of shared apartments or bigger co-housing situations where families and individuals are living either sharing apartments or living in proximity so that they can pray together daily, so that they can all invest in one local parish and serve people through that parish's ministries. And I asked one priest who was talking to me about this, how many living situations of just, perfectly ordinary working laity like that were out there in Paris. And he shook his head and he said, there's no count, but it's got to be hundreds. So again, now that there's beginning to be this solidly committed practicing group of laity in many parishes, people for whom Christianity is a living language and not a dead one that you might go study. Now, really meaningful outreach and evangelism is possible because there's a core who have the desire for that flowing out of their discipleship to Jesus. People are motivated for it. They have the spiritual strength for it. They know the Bible fairly well. They know their faith fairly well. And they see how all the people around them who have no spiritual bearings in the world are suffering. So again, healing services are very popular. I have a number of kind of pictures there. The top right and the left are a church, again, kind of in the Marais area. And I arrived at this service about 10 minutes early, and the entire building and all the side chapels were completely full, and I was directed around the back. So this picture here is where I was, all the way in the back of the altar with people just sitting on the floor and kneeling on the floor, unable even to see the service, but we could hear. And the priest brought the Blessed Sacrament around and blessed people. So, and then that one down on the bottom is the overflow into the plaza from a diocesan healing service at Saint-Sulpice. Hunger for healing. Hunger for healing. Another example, and this is just something I ran into, Notre-Dame-des-Champs, very ordinary neighborhood down near one of the train stations. They happened while I was there to be doing a 9-day mission to their neighborhood. They had some open cafes, they did street evangelism at the farmers market, they had an art show and many art teaching workshops, a lay testimony night, several concerts, a film on Martin Luther King. a sort of ask anything theology Q&A by one of their parishioner study groups, and what they called a Mass of the Curious, sort of bring your friend who knows nothing about Christianity. All of this done by the lay people of the church with, of course, support from the priests, and undergirded by parishioners in the church, which was open all day, doing 9 hours of Eucharistic adoration all day, praying the office, praying the rosary, and supporting this event in prayer. And you see, it's kind of funny, the Trinité, which is in a very flossy, nice area, has the formal venez et voyez, which is the polite way of saying it. And this church, which is in a much cheaper, low-rent area, says viens et vois, which is the much more casual way of saying come and see. And you see Jesus' arms reaching out there to embrace the neighborhood. And they had this display, chrétien, pas chrétien, qu'est-ce que ça change? Be a Christian, don't be a Christian, what does that change? So this entire display explaining what it might change in your life if you were to become a Christian. Another example, Le Dorothy, named after Dorothy Day. Another example of mission among young lay people in the first sort of post-Cardinal Lustiger generation. This is a cafe in a even lower income, very multicultural neighborhood with lots of immigrants. And they offer free workshops on things like plumbing, balancing your bank account. They have potlucks, they have dances, they have rental space, they have Bible studies, they have prayer meetings, also very serious conferences, and a local parish that's helping them out, and they're helping the parish out. All volunteers, though, all laity who've been touched by Jesus and want to share that with others. I mentioned arts and beautiful spaces, environments that are different. This is Saint-Eustache, which is an absolutely cavernous church. That's about 100 people in that crowd to get a sense of how huge the church is. And in conjunction with a festival of free concerts, they ran a 36-hour, all-night-long music festival, deploying all the beauty of the building and all the artistic talent of Paris across genres. Classical, jazz, rock, folk, everything, and punctuating it with masses, prayer gatherings, a gospel concert, and parishioners who themselves were formed as Christians doing evangelism in the nave with these vests to show, come ask me. And that kind of availability of people to talk to is true in a large number of churches. A lot of churches are open at least part of the day with attendants there, with posters that are kind of provocative and trying to get people to ask questions, and volunteers waiting to talk, waiting to answer questions about the building. Even walks to look at the interior of the building and sort of evangelistically explain what's the story here? What could this do for you if you considered living inside this story? And they have this image, this really wonderful image of being the creative minority, serving and loving a society that they're no longer kidding themselves is Catholic, right? Learning and sharing this gospel that they are no longer kidding themselves that everybody already knows. I want to close with a passage from a journalist that I was really impressed by during my time there. And I'll back this up with this picture from the construction work at Notre Dame, because that's kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about rebuilding a heritage such that people can know it and receive it in our own day. And Jean-Pierre Denis is the name of the journalist, and he has kind of observed the religious developments in France over the past decade. And in this book that I read of his, he describes the situation of the church since the 1960s. This unbelievable loss, decline in numbers, decline in baptism, decline in vitality, closing parishes, every possible metric dropping. Then he writes this. There's also awakening of young people. Only a few, sure, but whatever you say, that fact bothers them less than us, who had to suffer through being less and less numerous than the generation who preceded us, so weighed down with numbers. The young Christians of today are survivors. Survivors of apostasy, secularization, delusion, demagoguery, the need to please, the what's happening now, the polite reserve, the don't make waves, the over-sacred, and of the mistakes, sometimes crimes, the church has committed and covered up. They're afraid of nothing. Survivors are never afraid. The experts used to advocate for religion a la carte, or cafeteria Catholicism, this religion with no imposed program, a dining hall more than a chapel, where you could choose freely your own appetizer, main dish, dessert, and don't forget the soft drink. The new Christian generation has grown up in a culture saturated with offers and solicitations. They're coming of age at a time where, more than they ever have, people feel less free to believe than pushed not to. And still, this generation is investing with a liberty, a simplicity, and a generosity that would demand respect from our confirmed religious landscape observers if they bother taking the time to observe it. Because the Christian minority is there, opening Catholic bars, working with the disabled, founding an ecological journal, living with homeless people as roommates, going on mission to the countryside, moving in 2 by 2 to rectories or housing projects to make sure a lay Christian presence is on the ground. Social, mystical, ecological, this is the Catholic plus generation. Let's say Catholic plus plus. That's how impressive their coherency is. We cut them off from their roots, so they grabbed onto what still holds. We spit in the holy water font. They make the sign of the cross. We told them God is dead. They live on him. We secularized religion. They asked for signs, mystery, sacraments. We showed them a banal God. God shows them the path. We told them to be men and women come of age, free, autonomous. They fall to their knees because they know this is the best way to be adult, free, and autonomous. They wear a cross, and it's not a piece of jewelry, but a commitment. An external sign, yes, but a sign of an authentic interiority. We abandoned them, so they practice self-abandonment. They pray. Their confidence in God touches and troubles me. Today, transcendence is transgressive. Those who've been left without roots are going back to look for something deeply nourishing. But maybe it isn't even roots they want, but a source, a wellspring, because only wellsprings are always new. You can cut down a tree. Nothing can ever stop a wellspring. What Cardinal Lustiger did, and the process that he started through every method possible, was to point people back to the wellspring that is Jesus Christ. And the result of that, 30 years later, 40 years later, I guess we are, this creative minority of intentional disciples of Jesus, loving God and neighbor in the midst of a society that thinks they're crazy, was just unbelievably inspiring for me. So there's my Paris story.